There's a truth that many of us struggle to accept, a reality that might seem harsh at first, but contains within it the seeds of our greatest liberation. Nobody cares, and that's exactly why you should care more about yourself than ever before. You're sitting here right now, perhaps carrying the weight of others' expectations, their judgments, their opinions about your life choices. You spent years, maybe decades, shaping yourself to fit into the molds that society, family, friends, and even strangers have created. But let me ask you something. How has that been working out for you? Every morning, millions of people wake up feeling trapped in lives they never truly chose for themselves. They drag themselves through days filled with should-haves and must-dos, constantly seeking validation from a world that's too busy with its own struggles to truly notice. They're living in a prison of their own making. And the key to freedom has been in their pocket all along. You see, when I say nobody cares, I'm not speaking from a place of cynicism or despair. I'm speaking from a place of profound understanding and hope. Because the moment you truly internalize this truth, something miraculous happens. You begin to care about yourself in a way you never have before. Think about the last time you made a decision that felt completely right in your heart, but you hesitated because you worried about what others might think. Maybe it was leaving a successful career to pursue your passion. Perhaps it was ending a relationship that looked perfect on the outside but felt empty within. Or maybe it was something as simple as choosing to spend a quiet evening alone instead of going to a social event you didn't really want to attend. In each of those moments, you gave away your power. You handed over the keys to your happiness to people who, in the grand scheme of their own lives, spend very little time thinking about your choices. The truth is, most people are so consumed by their own journey, their own struggles, their own dreams and fears, that they barely have time to form lasting judgments about your life. This isn't something to feel sad about. It's something to celebrate, because in this truth lies your freedom. When you truly understand that nobody cares as much about your life as you do, you can finally begin to live it on your own terms. Look at nature for a moment. Have you ever seen a rose apologize for blooming? Does an eagle seek permission before soaring? Does the ocean ask for approval before it crashes against the shore? Nature simply is. It exists in perfect harmony with its own essence, never questioning its right to be exactly what it is. You were born with the same right, the right to be unapologetically yourself. But somewhere along the way, we forgot this fundamental truth. We started believing that our worth was tied to others' approval, that our success was measured by other standards, that our happiness depended on others' validation. But here's what happens when you start focusing on yourself. You begin to hear your own voice more clearly. That inner wisdom that's been trying to guide you all along. It becomes louder than the noise of the world. The path that's truly meant for you, it becomes clearer than ever before. I've witnessed countless transformations in people who finally grasped this truth. There was someone who spent 20 years in a career they hated because it met their parents' definition of success. The day they realized that their parents were too busy living their own lives to truly notice their child's daily misery, they found the courage to change course. Today, they're building a life that aligns with their own definition of success. When you focus on yourself, you're not being selfish. You're being authentic. You're not being inconsiderate. You're being honest. You're not being self-centered. You're being self-aware. There's a profound difference between living for yourself and living by yourself. When you choose to focus on yourself, you're choosing to become the best possible version of yourself. And paradoxically, this makes you more capable of meaningful connections with others. Think about it. When you're on an airplane, what do they tell you about oxygen masks? Put your own on first before helping others. This isn't just good advice for emergency situations. It's a metaphor for life. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot lead others to a place you haven't been yourself. The world doesn't need more people living lives of quiet desperation, trying to please everyone while slowly losing themselves. The world needs people who have come alive, who have found their truth, who have dared to focus on themselves long enough to discover what they're truly capable of. This journey of focusing on yourself isn't always easy. There will be moments when the old programming kicks in, when the need for approval feels overwhelming, when the fear of judgment seems paralyzing. But remember this, those feelings are just echoes of an old way of being. They're the death throes of a perspective that no longer serves you. Every time you feel the pull to compromise your truth for someone else's comfort, remember, nobody cares as much about your life as you do. Every time you're tempted to dim your light to make others feel less uncomfortable, remember, nobody cares as much about your potential as you do. Every time you consider abandoning your dreams because someone else doesn't understand them, remember, nobody cares as much about your happiness as you do. This isn't about becoming isolated or disconnected from others. It's about becoming so deeply connected to yourself that your relationships with others become more authentic, more meaningful, and more fulfilling. When you focus on yourself, you develop the inner strength to be vulnerable, the self-awareness to be genuine, and the confidence to be sincere. Let's talk about what focusing on yourself really means, because there's a profound difference between self-focus and self-absorption. When you truly focus on yourself, you begin to understand that your life is not a performance for others to judge. It's a journey for you to experience fully and authentically. Consider for a moment how much mental and emotional energy you spend thinking about what others might be thinking about you. It's exhausting, isn't it? And here's the fascinating truth. Most of those people aren't thinking about you at all. They're caught up in their own stories, their own struggles, their own dreams and fears, just like you are. This revelation can be incredibly liberating. All that energy you've been spending on managing others' perceptions of you, it's now available for something far more important, discovering who you truly are and what you truly want from this precious life you've been given. But here's where many people get stuck. They mistake focusing on themselves for selfishness. They've been conditioned to believe that putting themselves first is somehow wrong or immoral. Let me be clear that there's nothing noble about neglecting yourself in service of others' expectations. In fact, it's one of the most damaging things you can do. Not just to yourself, but to everyone around you. Think about the people you admire most in your life, the ones who truly inspire you. Are they the ones who constantly seek approval, who shape-shift depending on who's watching, who sacrifice their dreams on the altar of others' expectations? No. The people who inspire us are those who have found the courage to be themselves, who have done the inner work to know who they are and what they stand for. When you focus on yourself, something remarkable begins to happen. The noise of the world starts to fade, and your inner voice becomes clearer. You begin to recognize the difference between what you actually want and what you've been conditioned to want. You start to understand that success isn't a one-size-fits-all concept, but rather a deeply personal definition that only you can create for yourself. This journey of self-focus requires courage. It requires the courage to sit with yourself in silence and really listen to what your heart is telling you. It requires the courage to question everything you've been taught about what makes. It requires the courage to disappoint people who have grown comfortable with the version of you that exists only to please them. But here's what nobody tells you about focusing on yourself. It's not just about achieving your goals or realizing your dreams. It's about becoming intimate with your own nature. It's about understanding your patterns, your triggers, your fears, and your limitless potential. It's about developing such a strong relationship with yourself that external validation becomes unnecessary. You see, when you truly focus on yourself, you begin to notice things you've never noticed before. You start to recognize how your energy shifts in different situations. You become aware of the subtle ways you've been betraying yourself to keep others comfortable. You begin to understand that your time and energy are your most precious resources, and you become more intentional about how you invest them. This kind of self-focus leads to a natural elevation of your standards, not from a place of arrogance, but from a place of self-respect. You start to realize that every time you say yes to something that doesn't align with your values, you're saying no to something that does. Every time you compromise your truth to keep the peace, you're declaring war on yourself. And let's talk about peace for a moment. Real peace doesn't come from external circumstances or other people's approval. It comes from being in alignment with yourself. It comes from knowing that regardless of what's happening around you, you're being true to who you are. This is the kind of peace that nobody can give you and nobody can take away. The world tries to convince us that we need to constantly look outside ourselves for validation, for direction, for purpose. But the truth is, everything you need is already within you. Your task is not to search for it out there, but to clear away everything that's preventing you from seeing it in here. This is why focusing on yourself is not just important. It's essential. It's not just beneficial. It's transformative. When you focus on yourself, you're not just changing your life. You're changing the very way you experience life. You're moving from being a spectator in your own story to becoming the author of it. Think about how much of your life you spent trying to fit into boxes that were never meant to contain you. Think about how many times you've dimmed your light because someone else was uncomfortable with your brightness. Think about how many dreams you've put on hold because someone told you they were unrealistic or impractical. Now imagine what might be possible if you redirected all that energy toward understanding and expressing your authentic self. Imagine what you might achieve if you stopped waiting for permission or approval. Imagine how much more you could contribute to the world if you weren't constantly draining your energy trying to be what others expect you to be. This is why the truth that nobody cares is so powerful. It's not a reason to give up or to become cynical. It's an invitation to finally care about yourself in the way you've been hoping others would care about you. It's permission to stop waiting for someone else to validate your dreams, to approve your choices, to recognize your worth. When you truly focus on yourself, you develop a kind of inner compass that guides you more reliably than any external feedback ever could. You begin to trust your intuition, to honor your boundaries, to respect your own timing. You start to understand that your worth isn't something that needs to be proven to others. It's something that needs to be discovered and embraced by you. The most profound shifts in life often come from the simplest realizations. And here's one that can change everything. Your life is happening right now, not in the opinions of others, not in the someday that never comes. Right here, right now, in this moment. When you truly begin focusing on yourself, you start to notice how much of your life you've been living in reference to others. Every decision, every choice, every move carefully calculated against an imaginary audience that it's like being an actor on a stage, performing for an empty theater, yet still trying to please the non-existent crowd. But what happens when you finally turn the lights on and see that empty theater for what it is? What happens when you realize that the only person who needs to approve of your performance is you? That's when the real show begins. That's when you start living instead of performing. Let's talk about fear for a moment. Not the fear of failure. That's often just a mask for something deeper. Let's talk about the fear of being yourself. It's fascinating, isn't it? How we can be more afraid of our own light than of our darkness. How we can be more terrified of our potential than of our limitations. This fear often masquerades as practicality. Be realistic, they say. Keep your feet on the ground. But whose reality are we talking about? Whose ground are we standing on? When you focus on yourself, you begin to question these inherited beliefs that have been limiting your vision of what's possible. The truth is, most people who tell you to be realistic are really just asking you to be realistic about their limitations, not yours. They're asking you to play small so they can feel comfortable. But comfort has never been the architect of greatness. Comfort has never been the birthplace of transformation. When you focus on yourself, you start to understand that your potential isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to be explored. Your dreams aren't burdens to be managed. They're gifts to be unwrapped. Your uniqueness isn't something to be hidden, something to be expressed. Think about water for a moment. When water meets an obstacle, it doesn't stop flowing. It doesn't argue with the rock. It doesn't try to convince the mountain to move. It simply finds another way. It adapts. It flows. It continues its journey. Water doesn't lose its essence, no matter what form it takes. Whether it's flowing as a river, crashing as a wave, or rising as mist, you have this same adaptability within you. When you focus on yourself, you develop this fluid strength. You learn to flow around obstacles rather than crash against them. You learn to adapt without losing your essence. You learn to persist without losing your peace. But here's something crucial to understand. Focusing on yourself isn't about becoming hardened or isolated. It's about becoming so secure in who you are that you can remain soft in a hard world. It's about becoming so clear about your own worth that you don't need to prove it to anyone. Consider how much energy you spent trying to change people's minds about you. Think about all the times you've tried to explain yourself, to justify your choices, to defend your dreams. Now imagine channeling all that energy into actually living those dreams, into actually making those choices, into actually being who you are. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where theory becomes practice. This is where understanding that nobody cares becomes your superpower. Because when you truly accept that nobody cares as much about your life as you do, you stop asking for permission to live it. You stop waiting for the perfect moment because you realize that the perfect moment is now. You stop waiting for everyone to understand because you realize that understanding often comes after action, not before it. You stop waiting for the path to be clear because you realize that the path becomes clear only when you start walking. When you focus on yourself, you develop a different relationship with time. You stop seeing it as something to be killed or passed or wasted. You start seeing it as the precious resource it is. You start understanding that every moment you spend worrying about what others think is a moment you could have spent creating, growing, becoming. The shift in focus changes everything. It changes how you wake up in the morning. It changes how you approach challenges. It changes how you measure success, because when you're focused on yourself, success isn't about outdoing others or meeting their expectations. It's about outdoing your previous self and meeting your own standards. And let's talk about standards for a moment. When you truly focus on yourself, your standards naturally rise. Not because you're trying to prove anything to anyone, but because you begin to understand what you're truly capable of. You begin to see that many of the limitations you've accepted were never really yours to begin with. This rising of standards isn't about perfectionism. It's about authenticity. It's about refusing to settle for less than what you know is possible for you. It's about honoring the gifts you've been given by developing them fully. It's about respecting the life you've been given by living it fully. When you focus on yourself, you start to understand that self-care isn't selfish, it's essential. That self-respect isn't arrogant, it's necessary. That self-trust isn't naive, it's wise. You start to see that taking care of yourself isn't a luxury, it's a responsibility. Because if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't focus on yourself, if you don't believe in yourself, who will? Let's talk about what happens when you truly start focusing on yourself. Not just intellectually understanding the concept, but actually living it. Because there's a world of difference between knowing the path and walking the path. The first thing you'll notice is a shift in your energy. When you stop expending your precious life force trying to manage others' perceptions of you, you suddenly have an abundance of energy available for growth, for creativity, for transformation. It's like you've been running a marathon with weights on your ankles, and suddenly those weights are gone. This newfound energy allows you to dive deeper into understanding yourself. You start noticing patterns you've never seen before. You begin to recognize the difference between your authentic desires and the desires you've inherited from others. You start to distinguish between your true voice and the echo of others' expectations. But here's where many people get stuck. They mistake focusing on themselves for self-improvement. They turn it into another form of self-criticism, another way to tell themselves they're not enough. That's not what this is about. Focusing on yourself isn't about fixing yourself. It's about finding yourself. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming more authentically you. Think about a garden for a moment. When you tend to a garden, you don't criticize the seeds for not being flowers yet. You don't judge the buds for not blooming fast enough. You create the conditions for growth, and then you trust the process. This is how you need to approach focusing on yourself. You create the conditions for your own growth by removing what doesn't serve you. You clear away the weeds of others' expectations. You pull up the roots of old limiting beliefs. You create space for new possibilities to emerge. And then you trust your own timing, your own process, your own path. When you focus on yourself in this way, something remarkable begins to happen. The opinions of others start to lose their power over you, not because you become hardened or indifferent, but because you become so attuned to your own inner guidance system that external noise simply doesn't register the same way anymore. This is where true freedom begins. Because when you're no longer imprisoned by the need for approval, when you're no longer shackled by the fear of judgment, when you're no longer confined by the limitations of others' understanding, you're free to explore the full range of your potential. But let's be clear about something. This freedom comes with responsibility. When you focus on yourself, you can no longer blame others for your choices. You can no longer use others' opinions as an excuse for playing small. You can no longer hide behind the comfortable cushion of external validation. This responsibility might feel heavy at first. After all, it's easier to point fingers than to point the way. It's easier to blame circumstances than to change them. It's easier to complain about what others aren't doing than to do what needs to be done yourself. But as you continue focusing on yourself, you'll find that this responsibility becomes empowering rather than overwhelming. Because with responsibility comes authority. The authority to write your own story, to chart your own course, to define success on your own terms. You'll start to notice that the quality of your life improves, not because circumstances have changed, but because your relationship with yourself has changed. You'll find that challenges become opportunities for growth rather than obstacles to happiness. You'll discover that setbacks become feedback rather than failure. When you focus on yourself, you develop a kind of inner stability that external circumstances can't shake. You build a foundation of self-trust that others' doubts can't erode. You cultivate a clarity of purpose that confusion can't cloud. This is where many people misunderstand the concept of focusing on yourself. They think it means becoming self-centered or narcissistic. But true self-focus actually makes you more capable of meaningful connection with others now. Because when you're no longer seeking validation from others, you can actually see them more clearly. When you're no longer trying to get something from them, you can actually give more freely. Think about the oxygen mask principle again. When you put your own mask on first, you're not being selfish. You're ensuring that you'll be able to help others effectively. When you focus on yourself, you're not withdrawing from the world. You're preparing to engage with it more authentically and effectively. This is where the magic happens. When you focus on yourself, you naturally begin to attract people who appreciate you for who you actually are, not for who you're pretending to be. You begin to create opportunities that align with your true talents, not with others' expectations. You begin to build a life that feels authentic rather than imposed. The world doesn't need more people living lives of quiet desperation, trying to please everyone while slowly losing themselves. The world needs people who have done the inner work, who have found their truth, who have developed their gifts, who have something real to offer. When you focus on yourself, you're not just changing your life. You're changing your relationship with life itself. You're moving from being a passive recipient of circumstances to being an active creator of experiences. You're shifting from living by default to living by design. This journey requires patience. It requires compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. It requires the courage to face yourself honestly and the wisdom to love yourself anyway. It requires the strength to stand alone when necessary and the humility to accept support when offered. As we draw our time together to a close, let's talk about what happens when you fully embrace this truth. That nobody cares, and that's your greatest freedom. Because this understanding isn't the end of a journey, it's the beginning of one. When you truly focus on yourself, you begin to experience life differently. Colors become more vivid. Moments become more precious. Decisions become clearer. Not because the world has changed, but because you've changed your relationship with it. You've stopped living life through the lens of others' expectations and started experiencing it through the clarity of your own truth. Think about how much of your life you've spent asking questions like, what will they think? What if they don't approve? What if I fail? These questions have been like a fog, obscuring your vision of what's possible. Would I focus on yourself, new questions emerge? What do I think? What feels right to me? What am I capable of? These are the questions that clear the fog and light the way forward. This shift in focus changes everything. It changes how you define success. It changes how you measure progress. It changes how you view failure. Because when you're focused on yourself, failure isn't about letting others down. It's about learning what doesn't work. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself, right? Progress isn't about keeping up with others. It's about surpassing your previous self. But here's something crucial to understand. Focusing on yourself isn't a destination you reach once, and then you're done. It's a practice you commit to every day. It's a choice you make in each moment. It's a relationship you nurture continuously. Some days, this will feel natural and easy. Other days, it will feel like swimming upstream. There will be moments when the old programming kicks in, when the need for approval feels overwhelming, when the fear of judgment seems parallel. In these moments, remember, nobody cares as much about your journey as you do, and that's exactly as it should be. When you truly internalize this truth, something remarkable happens. You stop waiting for permission to be yourself. You stop seeking approval to pursue your dreams. You stop needing validation to trust your instincts. You become your own authority, your own source of validation, your own greatest supporter. This is where true power lies. Not in controlling others or circumstances, but in controlling your response to them. Not in changing the world, but in changing how you show up in it. Not in getting everyone to understand you, but in understanding yourself so deeply that others' understanding becomes secondary. Think about all the energy you spent trying to fit in, trying to be accepted, trying to be enough in others' eyes. Now imagine channeling all that energy into becoming more authentically yourself. Imagine directing all that effort toward understanding your own heart, developing your own gifts, following your own path. This is the gift that comes from realizing nobody cares. You finally give yourself permission to care deeply about what matters to you. You stop diluting your dreams to make them more palatable to others. You stop compromising your vision to make it more acceptable to the crowd. You stop waiting for the world to give you what only you can give yourself. When you focus on yourself, you develop a kind of inner abundance that naturally overflows to others. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you're so full of your own authentic life force that you can't help but share it. This is the paradox. The more you focus on yourself in the right way, the more you have to offer others. You see, when you're no longer seeking approval, you become more approachable. When you're no longer trying to impress, you become more impressive. When you're no longer trying to prove your worth, you become invaluable. This is the natural outcome of focusing on yourself. You become a fuller, richer, more authentic version of who you are. But perhaps the most beautiful thing about focusing on yourself is you start to recognize that you were never broken to begin with. You weren't a problem to be fixed or a project to be completed. You were always whole, always complete, always enough. You just couldn't see it because you were looking through others' eyes instead of your own. As you leave here today, carry this truth with you. Nobody cares as much about your life as you do. And that's your superpower. Use it. Let it free you from the prison of others' expectations. Let it release you from the burden of seeking approval. Let it liberate you from the exhaustion of trying to be all things to all people. Remember, the world doesn't need another copy of someone else. The world needs your unique voice, your unique gifts, your unique perspective. And the only way to give these gifts fully is to focus on yourself enough to develop them, to trust them, to share them. Your life is not a dress rehearsal. It's not a performance for others to judge. It's not a competition to be won. It's a journey to be experienced fully, authentically, and unapologetically. And the only person who needs to approve of that journey is you. So step fully into your own light. Take up the space that belongs to you. Speak with your true voice. Move at your own pace. Dance to your own rhythm. Create your own definition of success. Because at the end of the day, nobody cares as much about your life as you do. And that's exactly why you should care more about yourself than ever before. This is your moment. This is your life. This is your journey. Own it. Live it. Love it. The world.